Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to a world without central heating, fleece blankets, or the comforting glow of your phone screen. Instead, picture the North American continent a few hundred years ago, blanketed in snow, the air sharp enough to freeze your eyelashes, and somewhere in the middle of all that, people are just peacefully asleep, outdoors. Now most of us can barely handle our apartment thermostat dipping below 20 degrees Celsius, but the early Native Americans had an entire system, a calm, practical science of sleeping through cold that would probably put your favorite camping influencer to shame. So grab a warm drink, dim the lights, and let us slowly drift into the frozen landscapes of early America, where survival was not just a test of strength, but of cleverness, patience, and occasionally a good sense of humor about how cold toes can get. Let us start with the obvious question. How exactly do you stay warm when your bed is technically the ground? The short answer: layers. Lots of layers. The long answer: well, it depended on who you were and where you lived. The tribes of North America weren't one big blanket-trapped family. They stretched across thousands of miles, from the subarctic tundra to the Great Plains, the deserts of the Southwest to the forests of the Northeast. Each region had its own approach to what we might call primitive comfort engineering. Take the Lakota or Dakota people of the Great Plains, for instance. They had the tipi, a marvel of portable architecture. It wasn't just a tent, it was a microclimate. Animal hides stretched over poles, stitched tight, and placed at just the right angle to channel wind around it. Inside, the floor was lined with furs, and the sleeping area was slightly elevated, so that the coldest air, which hugs the ground, didn't reach you first. It's the kind of subtle insulation trick that makes you wonder if modern campers are overcomplicating everything with their 5-layer sleeping bags. And yes, they had fire, but here's the thing, not the bonfire you're imagining. An indoor fire in a tipi wasn't about blazing heat, it was about control. A small flame, right in the center, sending warmth upward and smoke through the top vent, which could be opened or closed depending on the wind direction. Too much fire and you'd smoke yourself out. Too little, and you'd wake up as a frozen museum exhibit. So it was all about balance, something our ancestors seemed much better at than we are. Now, if you drifted further north into the lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, or Inuit, things got even colder and more inventive. Sleeping outdoors there wasn't just uncomfortable, it was lethal if you got it wrong. So they didn't get it wrong. The Inuit, for instance, had the igloo, and yes, it really worked. It sounds like a winter fantasy, a house made of snow that keeps you warm, but the physics are solid. Snow traps air traps heat, and your body, even at rest, produces enough warmth to raise the temperature inside by 10 to 20 degrees Celsius. Add a few oil lamps made from seal fat, and suddenly, you're not freezing to death, you're cozy enough to nap. Inside, people slept on platforms covered in caribou hides, which were light, insulating, and surprisingly soft, like nature's version of a memory foam mattress. There's also this fascinating detail. People didn't necessarily sleep alone. Warmth was communal. Families, sometimes entire groups, slept close together under shared coverings. The concept of personal space wasn't exactly trending at the time. And honestly, when it's -30 outside, who cares? Body heat is body heat. Let's drift south for a bit, to the woodlands and the river valleys, where winters were milder but still cold enough to bite. Here you'd find longhouses built by tribes like the Iroquois. These were massive communal dwellings made of wood and bark, stretching the length of modern apartment buildings. Inside, fires burned down the center aisle, and families slept on raised platforms along the sides, wrapped in furs. It was smoky, sure, but the design worked. Warm air circulated upward, and the bark exterior trapped it inside. It's kind of like living inside a very large, rustic thermos. Even in the Southwest, where deserts could drop below freezing at night, the Pueblo and Navajo had it figured out. Their homes were made of adobe sun-baked clay bricks that absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly at night. That's natural insulation at its finest. And their blankets, woven from wool, often layered and heavy enough to make you feel like a well-wrapped burrito. But let's talk about the real secret weapon, the human mindset, because comfort isn't just about temperature, it's about what your body expects. If you've spent your entire life living outdoors, walking through cold, breathing cold, sleeping in cold, your body doesn't panic the way ours does when it feels a chill. They didn't dread winter, they prepared for it. Everything from diet to daily rhythm changed. People ate fattier foods, rested earlier, and conserved energy. Winter was slower, quieter, and meant for recovery. You might say that sleeping through freezing nights was less about toughness and more about harmony. And of course, the clothing helped too. We're talking layered buckskin, fur-lined moccasins, hoods pulled tight, and mittens that looked like they could swat a bear. The fur itself mattered. Deer, rabbit, fox, or caribou, each used for specific parts of the body. The trick was keeping air trapped between layers. That's what made warmth stick. It's funny, in a way. Modern people spend hundreds of dollars on outdoor survival gear that tries to recreate what these communities already perfected centuries ago, using materials that actually grew around them. No synthetic polymers, no YouTube tutorials, just observation and patience. Let's drift for a second into a quieter image. Imagine lying beneath the stars, the world outside silent, except for the faint crackle of a fire. The snow around your shelter glows faintly in the moonlight. The air smells of smoke, pine, and frost. You curl under a hide blanket. Someone breathes softly nearby, and the only sound left is the slow rhythm of your heartbeat and the wind brushing past the entrance flap. That was winter sleep. Simple, direct, human. And sure, sometimes the fire went out and mornings were rough, but even then, there was no panic, just routine. You get up, you stir the embers, add some wood, and another day begins. They didn't write motivational quotes about resilience. They just lived it. Let's float over, for a moment, to one of the most extreme examples of all, the subarctic Dean and Ethibiscan peoples of Alaska and northern Canada. Here, nights could stretch on for nearly 20 hours. Sleeping wasn't just something you did once per night. It was cyclical, interwoven with the rhythm of survival tasks. People would nap in intervals, wake to tend fires, check traps, then drift back to rest. In that rhythm, sleep became less about comfort and more about cooperation. You stayed warm because everyone stayed alert. Even in the coldest places, there's this strange calm in their traditions, a trust in the natural order of things. They knew cold was part of life, not an enemy to be conquered. And that mindset, more than any fur or fire, is what really kept them comfortable. So, let's sink a little deeper into the night. We talked about how Native Americans kept warm. Now let us talk about what happened after they fell asleep. Because for many tribes, sleep wasn't just a biological necessity. It was, well, an entire spiritual event. Dreams weren't random brain static. They were messages, guides, warnings, sometimes even conversations with ancestors who, apparently, had excellent nighttime communication plans. Among the Ojibwe, for instance, dreams were considered sacred. They believed each person had a bawayagan, or dream spirit, that could travel and gather knowledge while the body rested. So falling asleep wasn't just about resting, it was about learning. That might explain why they took sleep environments so seriously. You couldn't exactly commune with the spirit world while shivering to death. A calm, warm, dimly lit lodge was essential. And yes, they even had dream rituals for children, gentle songs sung before bed to invite protective spirits. It's basically the historical version of a bedtime playlist, minus the lo-fi beats. Let's float over to the plains again, where the Lakota and Dakota saw dreams as pathways to power. A dream wasn't just an image, it was a potential vision quest in miniature. If you dreamed of a certain animal or event, it could mark your path in life. So, imagine you wake up in a tipi on a freezing morning and tell your family, "Last night I dreamed of a hawk." Suddenly, that's not small talk, that's destiny. They'd discuss it, interpret it, maybe even create art around it. So yes, while we complain about not getting enough REM sleep, they were out here turning every nap into a full-on cosmic experience. Interestingly, their nighttime routines reflected this balance between body and spirit. Before sleeping, fire embers would be arranged carefully, not just for warmth, but as a symbol of life and continuity. The slow glow of coals represented the heartbeat of the lodge, something that carried energy through the night. You didn't just pass out beside a fire, you joined it in a quiet ritual of endurance. Now, depending on where you were, the actual position of sleep could vary too. Most tribes slept curled up, not because it looked cozy, but because it reduced heat loss. The fetal position was basically the prehistoric version of tucking yourself in. Blankets and hides were layered carefully, and if the group was large, people often slept side by side, alternating head to foot, to maximize shared warmth and minimize the someone's elbow in your face problem. But here's something that often gets overlooked: the rhythm of sleep itself. Many Native Americans didn't sleep in one long stretch the way we do. Nighttime was more fluid. People often slept in 2 segments, waking around midnight to add wood to the fire, talk quietly, pray, or just sit and listen to the wind. Historians call it biphasic sleep, and it's probably the original human sleep cycle, before alarm clocks and late-night shows ruined it. That middle night wake period wasn't stressful. It was peaceful, a natural intermission in the darkness. In the far north, the Inuit adapted to an even stranger schedule. When the sun disappears for months at a time, your sense of time sort of dissolves. They slept when tired, worked when awake, and didn't fight their circadian rhythm like we do now. Their bodies followed the temperature, the wind, and the availability of food, which, frankly, sounds healthier than scrolling through your phone at 2 a.m. pretending you'll sleep right after this last video. Let's drift for a moment into the spiritual layer again, the part where dreams shaped action. The Navajo, or Dine, had a deep belief in harmony, what they called HCH, a balance between body, spirit, and nature. So, when they slept, it was just about recovering from a day's work. It was about realigning with the world. Dreams could show imbalances, illnesses, or warnings from ancestors. Even nightmares weren't just bad dreams. They were signs that something needed to be corrected, maybe a wrong thought, a neglected ritual, or a forgotten gratitude. Imagine treating your bad dreams as performance reviews from your ancestors. Motivational, but slightly terrifying. There's also a fascinating cultural pattern. Many tribes believed that your sleeping direction mattered. Among some Plains tribes, you might face east, toward the sunrise, a symbol of renewal. Others slept with heads toward the fire, feet toward the cold, to keep circulation steady and spirits content. In other words, sleeping was a geometry lesson wrapped in spirituality. And of course, all this happened in near total darkness. No flickering bulbs, no light pollution, just firelight and stars. The Milky Way itself often appeared in myths as a path for souls, the spirit road. So when they lay on their backs and gazed at it before sleeping, it wasn't just beautiful, it was home. The night wasn't empty, it was alive with meaning. Now, back to the practical side for a second. Winters meant long nights, and long nights meant conserving heat. So sleeping spots were often chosen carefully. You didn't just crash anywhere. Shelters were positioned to block the prevailing wind, or near tree lines that naturally trapped warmth. Some even dug shallow depressions in the ground to reduce air movement, a small, cozy hollow lined with firs. Think of it as an early version of a sleeping pod, except it actually worked. And then there was the material culture around sleep, the actual objects. Blankets woven from rabbit skins, stitched together in rows, buffalo robes with thick, soft fur facing inward, mats made of reeds or bark, layered to create insulation. Even the smallest details mattered: how tightly the seams were stitched, how smoke holes were adjusted before bed, how food was rationed for the night. Survival wasn't a single decision, it was hundreds of tiny ones, repeated every evening. Let's pause again on the human part of all this, the emotional rhythm. For many people, winter nights weren't depressing, they were social. Families told stories, elders passed down oral histories, and children learned through listening. The quiet hours before sleep were sacred, the time for myth and memory. Firelight flickered, shadows danced, and someone's voice would begin a familiar legend about a trickster spirit, or a hero who outsmarted the winter itself. It was part warmth, part entertainment, part continuity. In the cold, stories were as necessary as fire. And that's one of the most beautiful aspects of this whole system, the merging of survival and culture. Sleeping warm wasn't just a physical act, it was social, spiritual, and deeply communal. While we tend to separate comfort from meaning, they blended both. Warmth came from community, from shared stories, from knowing your ancestors had also slept through 1,000 winters before you, and had figured it out. Let's float forward in time a bit. When European settlers arrived, many of them couldn't believe how comfortable Native Americans seemed, despite the conditions. They described them sleeping soundly in huts made of bark, or snow shelters, while the newcomers huddled and shivered in their wooden forts. The settlers' blankets soaked up moisture and froze stiff. The locals' hides repelled it. You can almost hear the frustration. How are they not freezing? The answer, of course, was simple. Centuries of experience, observation, and adaptation. You don't fight winter. You work with it. Even when contact and colonization disrupted these lifestyles, the traditional wisdom didn't disappear. Many survival techniques used by explorers and trappers, from fur layering to snow shelter construction, came directly from native teachings. So next time someone brags about surviving a tough winter camping trip, just remember, they were probably using methods perfected long before modern civilization decided to sell them back to us for $399.99 a set. As the fire fades in our imagination and the wind outside softens, picture the stillness of one of those winter nights. A tipi glowing faintly under the stars, smoke curling lazily into the sky. Inside, people sleep, breathing slow, steady, and unbothered by the cold. Because comfort, in the end, isn't about the weather. It's about belonging. Let us ease into the next part of this sleepy journey, the rhythm of the year itself. Because for Native Americans, sleep wasn't a static routine. It changed with the world. As the sun shifted, so did the habits of people who lived by it. There was no alarm clock, no 9 to 5, just the endless slow pulse of nature setting the schedule. And depending on the tribe and region, sleeping habits could stretch, shrink, or drift entirely depending on the season. In the heart of winter, when daylight might last only a few hours, sleep expanded. It was uncommon for people to rest multiple times during the long darkness, short naps near the fire, long stretches of shared rest, quiet periods of half-wakefulness, when stories or songs filled the silence. You didn't have to fight sleep, you just went with it. If your body said, "Nap now," you did. If you woke up at midnight, you didn't panic or reach for caffeine. You might feed the fire, adjust the hides, whisper a few words to the ancestors, then curl up again. By contrast, in the summer, especially in northern regions where daylight stretched almost endlessly, sleep shortened. There was too much to do: fishing, foraging, repairing, moving camp. Sleep became lighter, more flexible. People rested in shifts, often under the stars or in the open air. It wasn't that they were insomniacs, they were just practical. Why waste long sunlight hours when you could sleep deeply later, when the snows returned? They understood what modern science now calls seasonal sleep cycles, long before we invented the term. And it wasn't just about sunlight or darkness, it was about movement. Many tribes followed migration routes, and sleep habits followed too. When buffalo roamed the plains, the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Comanche followed, sleeping in lightweight tipis that could be packed and moved in hours. Travel days were long and exhausting, so nights were brief and deep. People would set up camp in circles, with the entrances of their lodges facing east, toward the rising sun. It wasn't just symbolic. The morning light helped warm the inside of the tipi faster. Smart, simple, efficient. Down in the southwest, the Hopi and Zuni experienced something entirely different: blazing hot days and freezing nights. So, their sleep schedule flipped. Work happened in the cool evenings and early mornings, and rest came in the mid-afternoon or deep night when the air finally softened. Adobe walls held that gentle warmth from the day, turning their rooms into slow ovens of comfort. It wasn't luxury, it was balance. And then there were the Pacific Northwest tribes, the Haida, Tlingit, and others, living among towering forests and rain-soaked coasts. Their winters were milder, but damp, and damp cold can be worse than dry frost. So they built large plank houses, elevated above the soggy ground, with central fires that burned all night. Smoke would curl through roof vents, carrying with it the soft smell of cedar and salmon. Here, sleep was communal. Entire families, sometimes multiple, sleeping side by side, each wrapped in woven cedar bark mats. That closeness wasn't just for warmth, it was cultural. It built trust, kept stories alive, and reminded everyone that they faced the long rains together. Now, let's talk about something we rarely think about: how light shapes the mind. In the modern world, we've basically declared war on darkness. We flood our rooms with artificial light and call it productivity. But to these early societies, darkness wasn't an inconvenience, it was a season in itself. The long nights of winter weren't meant to be defeated, they were meant to be lived through gently. It was a time for introspection, healing, dreaming, and quiet creation. You might mend tools, prepare hides, carve, sing softly, all under the calm pulse of firelight. Night wasn't a void. It was the other half of life, and that mindset shaped their emotional world too. Winter wasn't dreaded the way it is now, with our endless complaints about seasonal depression. It was accepted as part of the cycle, the slow inhale before the active exhale of spring. Sleep became a form of renewal, not escape. Even dreams, once again, played their part. People believed that the spirits of the cold, the north winds, the ice animals, visited the sleeping world more often in winter, bringing lessons or warnings. So sleeping wasn't just physical recovery, it was participation in a spiritual dialogue. Let us wander to a quieter image again, a small camp at the edge of a frozen river. Snow mutes every sound, except for the crack of ice shifting somewhere downstream. A fire glows low in a circle of stones. A few people are still awake, murmuring softly in a language the trees probably understand better than we do. Others are asleep, faces turned toward the faint heat. A hide shifts, a child sighs, an ember pops. It's not a scene of struggle, it's one of peace. Because this isn't about endurance. It's about belonging to a world where even the coldest nights have meaning. When spring came, sleeping habits changed again. Migrations restarted. The days grew longer, and nights became shorter, lighter, filled with the smell of thawing earth. People slept less, but better, in open shelters, under budding trees, or beside rivers swollen with meltwater. Children would fall asleep to the sounds of frogs or running water, instead of fire crackle. In some tribes, the first night spent outdoors without a fire was a small rite of passage, proof that winter had finally released its grip. And yet, no matter the season, there was always a quiet respect for rest. They didn't see sleep as laziness or weakness. It was balance, part of the same cycle that governed hunting, planting, birth, and death. Even in tribal languages, words for sleep often connected to words for peace or stillness. To rest was to return to harmony. Something modern life, with its endless noise and blue light, could probably learn from. Let's float once more through the centuries. Colonial contact, displacement, forced migration, all of it changed the physical ways people slept. But the old patterns survived in fragments. Elders teaching how to build snow shelters, how to line hides, how to watch the stars before sleeping. Even in reservations or settlements, the rhythm of early sleep, midnight wakefulness, and communal warmth persisted quietly. You can still find stories passed down through families about winter nights when the only warmth came from sharing both fire and memory. There's something poetic about that continuity. The world around them changed violently, drastically, but their philosophy of rest never fully disappeared. Because comfort isn't a luxury, it's a language. And for Native Americans, that language spoke of trust, rhythm, and a deep understanding that even the harshest night eventually softens. So, when we ask how they slept comfortably in the dead of winter, maybe the answer isn't just in their shelters or furs. Maybe it's in their relationship with the world itself. They didn't demand comfort. They created it with care, patience, and community. And as the night deepens, as the fire dies down again in our minds, maybe that's the real secret we're meant to remember. You don't conquer the cold. You learn to rest inside it. Let's wander north now, far north, into the endless pine forests and frozen lakes, where the Ojibwe Cree and other Algonquian-speaking nations survived winters that would have broken most European explorers in a week. These weren't cozy winters with snowmen and fireplaces. We're talking -30 degrees, ice-flecked winds, and the kind of silence that makes your breath sound like thunder. And yet people not only survived here, they slept well. The secret: they didn't fight winter, they used it. When snow piled up, they didn't see it as a barrier. They saw it as insulation. Snow, after all, traps air, air traps heat. So when the wind howled across the trees, Ojibwe families sometimes built snow lodges, temporary shelters dug into snowbanks, roofed with branches, lined with fir boughs. It sounds primitive, but it was basically a natural igloo made from the materials right underfoot. Inside, temperatures could rise from -20 outside to a livable 20 or even 30 degrees Fahrenheit, just from body heat and a small fire. No space heaters, no fleece blankets, just smart physics. Now, you might imagine this as some kind of miserable survival situation, but for these communities, this was just winter life. People joked, told stories, sang lullabies, smoked pipes. The fire crackled, and the air inside smelled like pine and smoker scent. That meant comfort. The fire, by the way, was small on purpose. A huge blaze would melt snow from above, collapse the roof, and welter in the night. So they mastered the art of the slow burn. A few embers, low oxygen, long-lasting warmth, and when it came time to sleep, they layered the floor. First, logs or bark, then cedar branches, then animal hides. If you were lucky, the last layer was for beaver or rabbit in particular, because those were like nature's thermal blankets. People didn't use pillows much. They might rest their heads on folded furs or packs. But sleep came easily. Bodies adjusted to the rhythm of the fire. There's something kind of poetic about it, how people could lie under a ceiling of snow and stars, in the quiet heart of winter, and still feel at peace. Let's float east, now to the Iroquois. These weren't tiny huts or tents. They were entire apartment blocks made of wood and bark, stretching up to 200 feet long, housing multiple families. Imagine stepping inside, the floor lined with woven mats, smoke drifting lazily toward holes in the roof, the air thick with the smell of cooking and cedar. Fires burned down the center aisle, one every few yards, each shared by 2 families. At night, when the fires dimmed, the space glowed faintly red, warm enough to dry hides, smoke meat, and lull children to sleep. Everyone slept in bunks, raised off the floor, layered with cattail mats and skins. The higher levels were warmer, thanks to heat rising. So, if you were a favored elder, you might claim a top bunk in winter. The lower bunks, that's where the cold air lingered, perfect if you wanted to avoid roasting alive, but not ideal in January. Privacy wasn't really a thing. You could hear everyone's breathing, coughing, and snoring. But there was comfort in that too, a shared human rhythm echoing through the night. And there's something interesting here. In many Iroquois communities, people didn't sleep 8 hours straight. They'd nap, wake, tend the fire, maybe chat softly, then drift back to sleep. It was segmented rest, tuned to the natural flow of night and firelight. Europeans later described this as strange, but to the people living it, it was simply how you kept balance, body and spirit, both resting in cycles. Now, out on the plains where trees were scarce and the wind came at you from all directions, sleep took a different form entirely. The tipi was the plains tribe's masterpiece, portable, fast to set up, ingenious in design. The conical shape shed snow and resisted gales, and the lining inside made of buffalo hide trapped heat. When you added an inner wall, leaving an air gap between that and the outer skin, it worked like double-glazed insulation. And in the center, a fire burned beneath a smoke hole that could be adjusted with flaps. Families slept in a circle around the fire, heads pointing toward the wall, feet toward the warmth. The floor was lined with sagebrush, then hides, then furs again, multiple layers that trapped air and heat. You'd fall asleep to the sound of the wind sliding around the tipi's skin and the faint pop of embers. Outside, coyotes called. Inside, everything glowed, amber and soft. Some tipis had clever touches too, heated stones wrapped in cloth placed under the bedding, or hides used as door flaps to block drafts. People even angled the entrance away from the wind's direction, because small details meant everything when you lived at nature's mercy. It's easy to forget how scientific these methods really were. Every layer, every fire position, every smoke, vent tested, refined, passed down. This wasn't primitive life, it was adaptive engineering, built on centuries of trial, observation, and respect for the land. And most of all, they knew the art of rhythm. When to rise, when to sleep, when to feed the fire, when to let darkness simply exist. We, today, chase warmth with buttons and thermostats. They earned it with patience and balance. Let's drift now to the far Arctic where things get truly extreme. Let's move into the true edge of survival now. The kind of cold that turns breath into ice dust, that silences everything but the crunch of your own boots. This is Inuit country where the sun disappears for weeks, and yet, somehow, people still found ways to live, laugh, and yes, sleep. It's easy to imagine the Arctic as lifeless, but the Inuit built an entire rhythm around it, and their winter sleeping habits were pure brilliance. You already know the word igloo, but what you might not know is how scientifically perfect it actually is. The igloo isn't just a snow dome, it's an architectural miracle. Snow is mostly air, and air traps heat. That's insulation. So when the Inuit carved blocks of compacted snow, stacked them in a spiral, and sealed the joints, they were building a thermal bubble. Outside, -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, 20 to 40 degrees warm enough that you could strip down to a single layer and be fine. The inside floor was raised above the entrance tunnel, so cold air being heavier sank down and escaped through the lower passage. The warm air stayed. A small oil lamp, called a cullic, burned with a steady flame, fueled by seal or whale fat. It provided light, heat, and that faint oily smell that everyone associated with safety. And then, at night, came the best part, the bedding. People slept on platforms lined with caribou hides. The hollow fur fibers trapped warmth like modern down feathers. Several hides layered together created a sleeping surface that stayed dry and soft, even in constant cold. Families would lie close, limbs overlapping, the warmth of one body feeding the next. Infants nestled against mothers, and fathers slept along the edge, nearest to the cold air, acting as a buffer. It wasn't romantic, it was teamwork. When the lamp dimmed and the wind groaned against the dome, that small glowing space became a tiny world of its own. Outside, everything was white and infinite. Inside, it was quiet, warm, human. Now, not all Inuit lived in igloos year-round. They were travelers, migratory, practical, adjusting to the seasons. In summer, they slept in skin tents, made from caribou hides, stretched over whalebone or driftwood frames. The hides were layered thick, and every seam was sewn tight with sinew thread. No light escaped, no bugs got in. The ground inside was lined with moss or dry grass. Then hides always hides, because fur, not cloth, was what kept you alive here. And if it got too hot in summer, yes, Arctic hot exists, they could lift the tent edges to let cool air flow through. Simple physics again, always observing, always adapting. It's easy to romanticize this, but it wasn't some serene wilderness spa. Fires had to be tended constantly. Fueled, riftwood or whale oil was precious. Smoke could sting your eyes, and frostbite was a constant threat. But the system worked. People survived for thousands of years using only what nature gave them. You know what's funny? When European explorers first encountered these winter camps, they were baffled. They'd arrive in their thick wool uniforms and shiver inside their canvas tents, while the Inuit slept soundly in houses made of snow. Some explorers literally froze to death within sight of thriving Inuit families. It was a perfect irony, people with technology and maps losing to people with knowledge and patience. And that patience carried through the night. The Inuit didn't sleep like modern humans do. Their rest followed the polar rhythm, long stretches of dim twilight, bursts of activity, then quiet again. They'd nap whenever it made sense. 2 hours here, 3 there, always flexible. Because in an environment where the sun might vanish for weeks, the clock wasn't your master. The sky was, let's not forget, either. That warmth was never just physical for these communities. The night held meaning. Stories were told by lamplight, tales of spirits, ancestors, tricksters, and hunters. They weren't just entertainment. They were teaching tools, guiding young minds through a landscape that could kill you if you didn't understand it. So, before bed, as the lamp flickered and the shadows moved on the snow walls, elders told stories about how the world began, or how a hunter learned to respect the seal he hunted. Children fell asleep to those voices, the sound of memory, of rhythm, of continuity. It wasn't just sleep, it was belonging. There's something deeply humbling about all of this. Everywhere we've drifted tonight, from the wigwams of the east, to the tipis of the plains, to the igloos of the Arctic, the lesson is the same. Warmth didn't come from comfort, it came from connection. People didn't just survive the cold, they understood it. They shaped their lives around it, learned from it, and even made peace with it. The modern world fights nature with insulation and thermostats. They negotiated with it with bark, snow, fur, and patience. And that's why they could sleep comfortably in the dead of winter, because they weren't fighting the night. They were part of it. After wandering through icy plains, smoky wigwams, and softly glowing igloos, we've reached the quiet end of the story. It's strange, isn't it, how something as ordinary as sleep can reveal so much about what it means to be human. The Native Americans didn't see winter as an inconvenience. They saw it as another season of life, a test of rhythm and respect. They learned from it, worked with it, even built comfort inside it. And all of that, every technique, every habit, came from paying attention. Today, we've lost most of that. We sleep under electric lights, in rooms the same temperature all year, surrounded by white noise machines pretending to be wind or rain. But the people who slept under real wind and real rain, they understood warmth differently. It wasn't a product, it was a relationship. Let's float back for a moment to a long winter night, somewhere in the Great Plains. The fire is low, glowing orange through the tipis' open top. The air smells like wood smoke and hide. Outside, the world is silent except for a single coyote in the distance. Inside, a family sleeps close together, sharing the same space, the same breath, the same dream. The oldest child rolls over and tucks her cold feet under her mother's leg. The father shifts his blanket slightly, careful not to let the draft in. No one speaks, but everyone feels the same small comfort. That's warmth, not just temperature, trust, safety, connection. You could say it was the original central heating system, people heating people. When anthropologists study traditional sleeping patterns, they often find something interesting. Pre-industrial people didn't sleep in one long stretch like we do now. They'd sleep in segments, fall asleep after dark, wake up after a few hours, talk quietly, maybe share food or stories, then fall back asleep until dawn. They didn't call it insomnia, they called it life. Night wasn't something to rush through, it was a whole world in itself. Dreaming, storytelling, tending the fire, thinking, that was all part of the rhythm, and it worked. Their bodies followed the sun and the seasons, not the alarm clock. Their sleep was aligned with the natural temperature curve of the night, cool air, body heat, slow heartbeats. They didn't need sleep apps or blackout curtains. They had something better, balance. If you think about it, they also understood silence better than we do. We call silence boring. They called it night. That endless hush of snow and stars wasn't lonely, it was grounding. The mind settles differently when the only sound is wind moving through trees, or a fire crackling somewhere near your head. Even their language reflected it. Among many native groups, sleep wasn't just a physical rest, it was a return to the ancestors, to the spirits, to the self that lives beyond the day. To sleep was to reconnect, and to wake was to carry that calm back into the world. Meanwhile, in modern life, we chase comfort like a moving target. Heated blankets, adjustable mattresses, 400 thread count sheets, and somehow, we still can't fall asleep. Maybe that's the quiet irony here. The more we control our environment, the less peace we find in it. Those who slept in snow huts and hide tents didn't need luxury, they were part of the world they slept in. They breathed the same air, heard the same storm, felt the same night. No separation, no illusion of control. Just life, happening at the natural pace of cold and warmth. If you could time travel back to one of those frozen nights, you might notice something else. They didn't seem afraid of the dark, they welcomed it. Because the dark wasn't empty, it was full of stories, ancestors, dreams, and rest. Maybe that's the real lesson of how Native Americans slept comfortably in the dead of winter. Not the architecture of their homes, not even the genius of their fur bedding, though that certainly helped. It's that they belonged to their environment. They didn't conquer the cold. They cooperated with it. They knew that warmth isn't about fighting nature. It's about listening to it. So tonight, as you lying in your own warm bed, far away from the snow and the wind, take a quiet breath and think about that. The people who came before you didn't have heaters or soft lights, but they had something we're still looking for. They had peace with the night. Maybe that's why they slept so well. Not because the world was easy, but because they didn't expect it to be. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we've forgotten. That means either you're genuinely fascinated, or you've fallen asleep and YouTube's autoplay is just doing its thing. Either way, let us take a slow walk through one last quiet stretch of history before we close our eyes. Because this story, like all the others, isn't really about how people built shelters or made bedding. It's about what those choices say about them and, maybe, about us. When you think about it, every sleeping tradition we've drifted through tonight tells a version of the same truth. Survival isn't just physical. It's emotional. It's cultural. You can pile all the fur and firewood you want, but without trust, routine, and belonging, you still freeze, just in a different way. Native American communities understood that instinctively. Sleeping wasn't private. It wasn't tucked behind doors or guarded by walls. It was shared, a communal rhythm. When one person turned in the night, others adjusted. When someone whispered a story or mumbled a dream, the sound rippled softly through the dark. It was a living reminder that no one was alone. Today, most of us sleep alone, in climate-controlled boxes, listening to recorded rain. We call it peace. But maybe what we're really hearing is the echo of what used to be connection. There's something deeply human about gathering around warmth, whether it's a fire, a lamp, or even just shared breath. Every culture, in its own way, built that ritual. The wigwam, the longhouse, the tipi, the igloo, they weren't just architecture. They were symbols of community wrapped in engineering. Every inch was designed for survival and togetherness. A low ceiling to hold in heat. Circular walls to keep the wind from sneaking in. Shared sleeping spaces to conserve warmth, and frankly, affection. It wasn't accidental. It was centuries of quiet wisdom, knowledge passed from one frozen night to the next, refined by necessity. Let's be honest, modern humans are terrible at this. We've spent thousands of years trying to outsmart nature, and all we've really done is build a different kind of cage. We're warm, but restless, safe, but strangely uneasy. We've traded snowstorms for screen light, and campfire stories for streaming cues, but the body still remembers. Somewhere deep down, it still expects the rhythm of darkness and dawn. It still craves the slow warmth of another heartbeat nearby. Maybe that's why people find peace in camping, even if it's just once a year. For one night, they get to fall asleep to real air, real sound, and real cold, just enough to remind them what being alive actually feels like. In a way, every old sleeping practice is a mirror of a worldview. The Inuit igloo said, "We trust our hands and our snow." The plains tipi said, "We move, but we belong." The eastern longhouse said, "We share everything, even the night." Each structure told a story about balance, not luxury, not isolation, just enough. And in that just enough, they found peace. A peace so quiet, you could hear the world breathing outside your wall of snow. I like to think about what it would have been like to wake up in one of those winters, to open your eyes and see frost glittering on the hides above you, sunlight filtering in faintly, someone already stirring the embers back to life. You stretch, you listen, you smell smoke and animal fat and cold air. It's morning, but not the kind that demands anything, the kind that just exists, and you exist in it. That's a kind of wealth that doesn't show up in bank accounts or productivity apps. It's the wealth of stillness, of knowing that warmth and sleep aren't rewards, they're part of the flow. So maybe, next time winter hits, try something old. Turn off the heater for a bit, wrap yourself in layers that feel real. Let the room cool, breathe the air, listen to the night for a minute before you sleep. You won't freeze, but you might remember. Remember that you're part of something bigger, the same cycle of cold and warmth, dark and light, that our ancestors moved through for millennia. And maybe that's all the comfort you need. So, as we drift toward the end of this long, sleepy story, tonight's not really about how Native Americans slept in the cold. It's about how they lived with it, how they turned hardship into harmony, and how warmth was never a luxury, it was a shared understanding. They didn't conquer nature, they befriended it, and in return, it let them rest. All right, that's the end of the night. Dim the screen. Take a deep breath, and maybe, just maybe, let the world be a little colder outside your window tonight. Because somewhere, thousands of years ago, someone slept through a blizzard in a shelter they built with their own hands, and they were perfectly warm.